Very welcome to this London Art Week talk on public sculpture. Thank you very much for joining us indeed, and welcome. We're just going to quickly introduce ourselves because we really have got a glittering panel on this subject for you. So my name is Abby Hignell. I founded Hignell Gallery back in 2015. We specialise in only sculpture, mainly for open air, and mainly for women artists. Claire, if you could quickly introduce yourselves for us.
Hello, I'm Claire Mander, and I'm director and curator at an independent curatorial practice called theCoLAB. We commission mainly female artists to make very new and experimental work using all sorts of different materials. And we currently have our largest project on the roof of Temple Tube Station called the Artist's Garden.
Thank you, Claire. And Melissa, if I could just ask you to introduce yourself.
Yes, hello, I'm Melissa Hamnett. I'm Director and Chief Curator at the Houses of Parliament for the collections there. And I worked before that in sculpture for a very long time, both in sort of public realm projects, but predominantly at Victoria and Albert Museum.
Thank you, Melissa. And Nick, if you could introduce yourselves, please.
Yeah, my name is Nick Fiddian-Green. I'm a male sculptor and have been practicing, shall we say, 40 years actually. And I suppose, got stuck on one subject. I started over 40 years ago, a chance encounter with a phenomenal Greek relic in the British Museum, the horse's head. It isn't my only subject, but it's the one I suppose I've taken to the public place over the years, most recently, I suppose, most interestingly, in terms of finding that opportunity to build in a way that is I suppose challenging and I suppose a part of the public place.
Thank you, Nick. And do we find you in your studio today?
I wish I could say yes. Unfortunately, I'm afraid not. But I've got. I'm not quite sure whether it'll block the whole screen. I've got a lump here, which I thought I can. Is that visible?
Yes, that's what we're all here for.
Okay.
Brilliant.
I mean, bizarrely, and yes, it is a horse's head. Funnily enough, but it is about the most recent piece that I have been casting into bronze, which is one of my greatest materials to use to date. It's a particular commission for a very public event, actually not in this country, in Siena, the great paleo race, which was won by client this year. And this is just an example, happens to be here in my hand.
Thank you. Well, that leads us perfectly on to our first question, which is, what do we all like about public sculpture, and why is it important? And Nick, why is open air sculpture important to you?
I think probably part of my journey was the fact that originally, as most sculptors would probably say the same, we start quite small, and as you talk about these amazing female artists working with the project at Temple at the moment, therein lies a question of how to make things stand up, how to be able to afford materials that can weather the storms of the open air place. So I suppose briefly, my journey was slow, was small. It grew as the years went by. I had no plan. It was just the way I was excited by that moment when I finally took something outdoors. It moved from inside to outside, and suddenly I was confronted by the environment. And it's that aspect, I suppose, that's been most exciting. Placing works in environments, whether urban or rural, is an amazing honor, I suppose, and a chance. And if I could do more, I would.
And I think that's it. It's something that a painting cannot do. Melissa, maybe you could let us know what what's drawn you to public sculpture over the years?
I mean, I think, you know, right at the heart of it, it's there for everyone, isn't it? It transforms our environment, it transforms our cityscape. It's such a physical medium, you know, there's something about the scale, the materiality, but more than sort of any kind of backdrop, it really reflects, I think, our society. It can reflect its time, it can reflect our time, and it can really show how we behave and relate to the outside world, and it can frame our existence. It kind of constantly questions our relationship with objects, I suppose.
Absolutely. And Claire, what do you find is the most special thing about public sculpture?
Well, I think it's in the title of this talk, really. It's the life of public sculpture. And it's got a quality, a changeability. It's not static, even though it's usually an unmoving object. It changes, it creates memories. It's a fulcrum for people to come together, to experience things, to do things. And it's this connector, really, between public and place, and also between times.
Yes, I think it always makes me think of it's like a catalyst. There was a lovely example at the Fitzwilliam Museum. They started doing a contemporary sculpture promenade just on the skinny bit of grass outside the Fitzwilliam, and it increased their visitor numbers hugely because it just broke down that barrier, because the sculpture was in people's space. They didn't have to walk through doors to experience an exhibition. It's something that caught people's eye, that engaged people, you know, in their own daily lives, who then went, oh, I've never actually been into the Fitzwilliam, and went through, and that's an extraordinarily powerful thing. So, which leads us very much into our second question, which is how public sculpture has changed. And I wondered, Melissa, as someone who deals with historic sculpture probably more than the rest of us, if you could give us some context to how public sculpture sort of then and now.
Sure. I mean, interestingly, more than you might expect, there are more modern and contemporary works at Parliament than you may know. But I think, you know, from Roman times right up to even the 19th century, squares and city spaces, open spaces were filled with statues, often equestrian statues of emperors like Marcus Aurelius in Rome, or kind of kings like Marichetti's Coeur de Lion, the work that sits right outside the Houses of Parliament depicting Richard I. And I think these bronze sculptures, often of men, you know, except for a few rare instances of queens or empresses or Joan of Arc, you know, they were designed to be visual projections of, I mean, just see it there, of action, of power, both in their pose, in their use of material. You can't see it here, but Richard I is elevated right up onto a plinth, you know, effectively, you know, giving him status, authority, and emphasizing his importance. And I think, you know, when we think of a lot of public sculpture in the realm, particularly from the 19th century, there are many works that have propaganda purposes. They're there with sort of political intent. And I think what's really interesting as we think about how sculpture's changed, I mean, if you think about modern abstract sculpture, you see a really considerable shift from, for starters, just the use of the plinth. And interestingly, I mean, another parliamentary work, the Henry Moore's Knife Edge, just down on Abingdon Green, down the road, which many people will probably know because the press interview in front of it so often. But you know, it's it's completely different. The reduction and reorganization and use of the plinth, for starters, it completely changes the viewer's interaction with the sculpture. More's taken away that kind of idealism of the sculpted object, and very much is in favor of kind of environmental naturalness, both in his kind of form, the purity of his form, and so the engagement is completely different. And I think, you know, we talk about it a lot in sculpture, but the freeing of sculpture from the plinth is something that's carried through the 20th century, and this has gone hand in hand with a kind of change of materials. You know, you have the kind of canonical use of bronze and of marble, and I think throughout the 20th century there was much more exploration of different materials with direct carving, and in some ways, you know, marble and bronze were either deemed too traditional or too expensive or too constraining, and sculpture today not only uses a kind of far greater breadth of material, and a really different use of space, air, walls, you know, floor-based works, and it can transform sites using incredibly dazzling patterns, colors, impromptu performances, pop-ups. So yeah, I mean, sculpture today versus that of the past has morphed into a much wider dialogue.
Mm-hmm. And I think artists, it's something that is embraced. It doesn't even have to be a unique art form now. That sculpture is part of your of what you're making. And I think case in point, Claire, your amazing installations on Temple Gardens, where we've gone from it being in the vernacular, where we, you know, putting something on a pedestal, you know, is something what we all understand, and was so key in sculpture to the projects that we see you do today.
Well, actually, it's really interesting because the artist who's currently got her installation on the Temple roof terrace is Holly Hendry. And when she arrived at the site, she said, this is like an enormous plinth for women artists. And she viewed this space as a vast, because it's a raised up space. You have to walk up 10 steps and you're at the height of the treetops. And she said, this is a vast plinth. But I think the plinth is a really important thing. Conceptually, it's absolutely key, because you're bringing sculpture down to the level of people, and you're actually inviting them to touch and to participate and to be within the orbit. You can get much closer to something, and you can you know, be with it on much more equal terms. So I think that was a key thing, and I think artists really took that to heart. And then there were all sorts of developments in the field of performance art and using the body, and could the body be a sculpture, and all these questions of what materials would constitute a sculpture, and does it have to be an object? And it's a very, very dynamic artistic field, and it is certainly not restricted to a canvas or any specific material. And on that, I mean, we've had everything from fake grass to plants to basketball flooring to rope and coir, and which has actually been very successful, with lamb's wool, to inflatable vibrating aliens that have just left us, sadly. But there's a whole world out there of things that you can experiment with. Holly Hendry, in fact, is repurposing a lot of industrial materials, and that's all ducting that has been cut in to her specifications rather painfully by the ducting producers. And then she actually went through the process of casting the fenders herself. So there is part of a hands-on in a large sculpture work, but you can see her inside her cast there with the dog. And then part of it is you know, amending other materials. But yes, the materials are, you know, are really important.
And is it the audience that has changed as well, would you say, Claire? I'm thinking of who is commissioning now. Has that changed the dynamic in public sculpture?
Well, I think definitely. I think there are. The commissioners are totally different. I think, you know, you have. I think before it was only there were a lot of religious commissions. It was essentially it's wherever the money is there for something that is not essential. You know, it's not actually essential. You know, life or death thing to do, but it is a way to create a community or an identity, I suppose, of a place or a people. So it depends where those people are that want to spend their money in that way. And I think nowadays there are more people, for example, councils or philanthropists. Sometimes it's the developers who do it slightly against their will under legislation, and they have to put some money towards public art commissions. So that has changed a lot. In terms of the audience, I think that people really now understand that public art is for them, and it really brings people together. It's been proven time and time again. The Fitzwilliam is one example. I did a series of landscape art commissions in the North Morecambe Bay, and we had 40,000 people over 2 weeks coming to literally the middle of nowhere, an hour's walk from a car park to see a sculpture on a hillside with their dogs and the grannies and the families. Everybody came, everybody had to come because it was a big event. But there was an appreciation that this event was for them. It wasn't for someone else, it wasn't for an elite art historian who needed to know exactly what was going on. So I think that's a very good thing.
Definitely. And Nick, I often think the way that public sculpture has changed with your vision of the horse just fits our time so well, because it's a non-political image, and it brings people to a space in a very different way. I just wondered what you thought of maybe even over the span of your career, how you found public sculpture has changed.
Well, I think it's been very interesting what I've already heard and learnt listening to everybody so far, and particularly with what I call a very contemporary and modern approach to a challenging subject of placing works of art, you know, outside. You know, what materials, you know, can we use that can survive? You know, that's the first thing. But obviously, what we've just heard is there have been ways already, clearly, even from industrial and recyclable and you know, processes and materials that I never really knew about when I was growing up. And I think probably part of my, let's just call it 40 years thereabouts, you know, I did fall in the footsteps of, strangely, the Henry Moore that you put there, is to me makes complete sense. It's on a plinth, it's made of bronze, and it's a sort of abstract based on a figurative career, or a man who moved through you know, his own journey, finding forms that were incredibly modern and daring. So for me, strangely, you know, I understand putting a bronze on a plinth. Plus, it's a very figurative object. It's the head of a horse. There's no mistake, I think. And yet, I think what I found very interesting is that this concept of the shift. Oh no, yeah, I think I'm still there. From political stroke, heroic stroke, these noble feats of what are they? They're reflections of success, power. All of these. Let's take Richard I as a kind of example. Often equestrian, the nobles and knights and kings and queens that came before, and etc. Moving into this period now where we're talking about, and I think which is really interesting, this what's happening now, exactly as explained, 40,000 people making an hour's journey to the middle of nowhere to see what. And I think that says so much. What it says is what they're doing is probably what we've been doing for thousands of years.
Yes.
But today, interestingly, at a time where you wouldn't expect it to happen, we're still doing the same thing to an object that we may not even understand when we get there. But what we're doing is searching. So here we go. The encounter is really what we're talking about. This is for me the point that I learned when I put the horse, first of all, at Marble Arch for a period. People came to me who knew nothing about the subject and nothing about art necessarily. They just told me about their encounter on a daily basis for quite a few, heading west to work and then east in the opposite direction and vice versa on their commute across London. And they said to me, the point about it for them, when I said, what do you think? What are you trying to say? They were saying, and it summed up in one line, they said they didn't really know, except for something, which is that it made them smile.
Yes.
Now, I don't think physically, I think it's internally. And I think it goes back to the pilgrim. It goes back to the ancient, go back to the Romans and way before, where what was happening is we were placing, as you said, these pieces in these phenomenal squares across the world, where people were passing through and were caused and forced, here we go, to stop. And they were either going to be led to a place where they were supposed to kind of celebrate somebody else or an event or a character's life or a celebration of such, or a memorial, shall we say. But today what's quite interesting is I think what I see, which is beautiful in this conversation, is to see, and I think I feel a part of that because I didn't know it was happening. I didn't plan it. It was one of those accidents that came only about the invitation of the people. I don't want to put things in public places that upset people. That's why, partly to do with part of my work, a strong part is that it isn't a political statement as such or a religious statement. It is a statement of how is it for you when you pass this object? And if you leave it feeling curious, shall we say, or uplifted, or a little bit concerned as a result of that brief encounter, and here we go, it will depend on the climate, and it will depend on the light, the time of the year, the time of the day. And here we go, more than that, how you are feeling in response to the outdoor environment. That, I think, is what I learned by having this opportunity. Yet, to answer the question, I'm a figurative man. I work in bronze on a monumental scale. And as I said before, my greatest search or desire is to place works in public places where it is all inclusive. There's nobody's paying. Everyone can make that journey or not. And the fact is that
democratic thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's glorious, isn't it? It's basically saying everything's changed, but nothing's changed at the same time, which is so true, because there is something in us. And when I look at your work, yes, we're seeing a traditional subject matter and traditional materials, but technically, going back to Richard I, the horse was the plinth.
Yeah.
And now the horse is the star, is the god, and just that elevation, but that absolute peace with the pieces, it just transports you. And I think that's a lovely dialogue, exactly as we were saying about the changes of material. It was reminding me, I'm just flicking through, of an installation one of my artists was involved with at Chatsworth, which I know knows very well, which is a piece called Natural Course, which is dry stone walling, again, traditional material, but reimagined. And it's a piece that you can actually walk through and sort of into, so it becomes an interactive piece. But also a nod to biodiversity, in that it's actually a habitat as well. So constantly changing. It seems to be our general answer. Which leads us on to how do artists respond to a commission? And Nick, I'd very much your wheelhouse. So I'd love to start with you. Arguably, you know, your most famous work at Park Lane Marble Arch. And I see your fantastic works at RHS Wisley and, you know, mainly rural settings. How did that commission come about? And was there a different approach because it was going into an urban setting?
I think probably the quick answer to it is that if I am invited to a space and shown a space and offered an opportunity to express myself, probably through the head of a horse, and place that object in that place, you know, in a way that's the sort of beginning and the end. You know, it's for me the greatest challenge, because, you know, I have a great line, which is, it's important that it's not too big, but it's also that it's not too small. It's very hard to find that balance. Equally, and more importantly, is I don't want to upset that space. Sometimes there are landscapes that I've stood in where for a moment I thought, well, wouldn't it be fantastic to place something there? I closed my eyes for a moment, and when I open them again, I actually go, do you know what? It's such a beautiful world out there in that particular direction. I wouldn't want to put anything there. So this juggling of the invitation to place in public places is for me, has been very few. And you know, we're up against that on an element of who is going out of their way to fund public art. And I wish there was more. And I wish that, you know, as with the next generation coming through, this opportunity to fill the world with expressions of intent and wonder, and for us to be able to have that opportunity as artists to do this, to be celebrated and cause effect.
Absolutely. And with that opportunity, Nick, is there, we'd love to know your process, because obviously when you're looking at a model like the fantastic model you have there, as opposed to looking into a landscape and looking up at a piece, are there changes, or what's the process from going from small to scale?
Yeah, it is very risky. There is an element of mass, but there's also an element of proportion. As we know, you can go up by 2 feet or 3 feet, which doesn't sound much, but once you're up at about sort of 20-foot level and you start to move to 30-foot, you've only got to go up by a foot, and the entire volume can shift exponentially in the mathematics that's you know, related. So there's a huge amount of risk involved in being daring. I mean, that's why Gormley, you know, his phenomenal, let's talk about his Angel of the North, is, you know, it's not that big, but actually it's a phenomenal piece of engineering at a level that is unimaginable when you're starting at a model, which he made a series of them at about 2 foot tall. To make that leap, I think, is one of the greatest, most exciting, most daring and risky things that I could do. And for me, 30 feet isn't really, is for me about as big as I've gone so far. However, you know, I do know that we you know, when you first see it, and when it was first put upright at Marble Arch in 2010, you could almost hear there was a sort of intake of air in the audience. There were about 400 people turned up for the installation. And when it suddenly landed, there was this thump because there was a slight engineering error, and it dropped by about 6 inches. And that, we're talking, was about, I think it's about 9 tons onto a single point. But there was this element response, almost unconscious from the audience, which was this intake of air. And I think that's what happens with scale. It's awe-inspiring, and it's not to say, here we are, not to make it big for the sake of being big, but make you know, it's slightly like, let's get a bit Roman. Come on, you know, let's build. You know, let's work together. I mean, that's what we have to do, and we can do it.
Yes, and I think in a cityscape, you know, as much as an enormous rural landscape, you know, it's not that you're competing, but it's, you know, exactly as you said, it's got to be big enough. Claire, wondered, going back to our original question, what's your experience of how artists respond to a commission?
Well, I mean, I think working outside is they're very particular, the sculptors that want to work outside, because it comes, as Nick said, with huge responsibility to the public, to the place, and it comes with a lot of risk because you're right out there on show. There's absolutely no hiding it, no pretending that exhibition didn't really happen, or stuffing it in the back of a cupboard and pretending you never made it. You know, it's right out there for everyone to see, especially something like that on at Marble Arch, which is, as you say, awe-inspiring. So I think you've got to be quite brave as an artist, and there are certainly, in my experience, the sculptors who are willing to battle with gravity on this kind of scale, and it's got to be the ones who have a really intense and profound interest in making things stand up and which materials they can use. And they have to be makers, you know, they have to be really interested in the properties of whatever material they're using, and the structural engineering side, and the, you know, the calculations and all that the logistical side. It also takes a great sensitivity to the site, and I think for public sculpture commissions to be successful, they need to be not just physically rooted in the space, they need to very much be conceptually rooted in the space, or speak to the specific community, or you know, reflect something physical about the environs. There's no, you know, there's this sort of idea that you can pick up a sculpture and sort of plonk it in the middle of a place where it really doesn't belong. It's very jarring, and the public are aware of this sort of mismatch. So, I think the commissioning process is a very delicate one, and it takes time, and it takes quite a lot of money to get it right. But it's a fascinating process.
Melissa, do you think, with asking the question how artists respond to a commission, that there's a difference now between permanent versus temporary? There's the temporary installation, which is something which is very much part of the art world these days.
Yeah, I mean, I think commissioning contemporary public sculptures can often actually open up, you know, unexpected opportunities. A temporary work may be different in terms of its approach to materials. I mean, I think Claire and Nick make a really good point there when you're thinking about an enduring public work that's going to be permanent. Your ability to think about how it sits within its context and can be maintained and continue to be enjoyed is one thing. And I think one of the possible opportunities, perhaps, with temporary commissioning is that you might have pieces that can be perhaps more performance-based, or complex installations that last for a certain duration, and I think that exploration is really interesting. I mean, I was thinking also about how it can affect the nature of the work, and I think, you know, one of the points we've been making today is that sculpture constantly questions our relationships with with surroundings, with our ways of thinking, with how we're feeling, and it demands that interaction, but it can also negotiate our surroundings. And as Nick said, you know, it can bring real hope or community interest. And I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about in terms of spectacle of sculpture, in a more temporary sense, was, I don't know if you remember the 2018 installation on the Serpentine Lake, Christo's
Yes.
huge, like 7,000 painted stacked barrels. And the materials for the site, but also its temporary nature, were all part of that commission. So I think, yeah, I think it can bring a different set of constraints, but it can also bring opportunity. And I think the potential for perhaps being less site specific,
Yes,
and moving works, you know, around the country or across borders, is something that temporary installations and pop-ups are increasingly doing.
yeah, I think that's very true, and I think, and as Nick will know, with working in bronze, there, you know, the multiple, you know, we know Rodin's thinker because there is more than one, you know, and or the Burghers of Calais, and I was just going to quickly mention two projects that I have been involved with. One, two very different. Oh, she just skipped it there. So Sophie Ryder, the Minotaur and Hare on the Bench, which has gone into London's newest park at Wood Wharf, which is in Canary Wharf, was actually first commissioned for Cheltenham Town Centre, which is where cast number 1 is. But Wood Wharf specifically wanted the piece there, but then Sophie sort of reimagined it and made the smaller bench, which you'll see next to it, which has an Alice in Wonderland type scale that an adult can sit on it, or children, and so you can create your own narrative. And like the sort of little cogs and toys within the sculpture, there's also little inclusions within the little bench, including a mobile phone on the arm, which everybody tries to pick up. So technically a piece that was sort of taken out of its original context, but works in a different way. And then another project we did, which is, I just wanted to say, because it was just mainly because it was just such a lovely experience, and we all know they're not always that. Oh, if I can find it, it's the Helene Blumenfeld marble, which is just round the corner from Nick's in Marble Arch, which was an amazing project, mainly because here we are, Tempesta, because that was commissioned by the architect. They kept the facade of the Lancasters, but behind those windows is completely modernized apartments. But they gave her utterly free rein to respond to the space, and using a traditional material which he's known for with marble, it just completely reimagines the material. And even though it's white on white, that sort of the curvaceous open arms which look over Hyde Park just set fire to those incredibly linear lines behind. So it's just lovely, isn't it? Just the breadth of everything that we're talking about. Which leads me to my next question, which is may prove tricky. I was going to ask what everyone's favourite public sculpture was, really, as a what is a successful public sculpture. Melissa, if we could start with you, what do you feel? What moves you?
I mean, it is a very big question, and I think Nick made a brilliant point earlier on, which is about how how sculpture changes in the landscape. So, you know, different times of day, different seasons. And for that reason, I feel, you know, almost like at different times of year, I might have different favorites.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a really it can really engage you and challenge you in different ways, both because of your internal feeling at that moment, but also those wider pieces. I mean, I think one work that I've always loved, and I think it sort of transforms Oxford Street and makes you look up, is Barbara Hepworth's Winged Figure.
Yes.
It's just, you know, it it draws the eye. You interact with architecture, sky, her forms. I think it's a beautiful piece, and I'm thrilled that it's staying there. But equally, you know, something I remember during the pandemic was I live up in northeast London, and Queen Elizabeth Park, the Olympic Park, is not far from me, and when we were confined to sort of moments of daily walks that were constrained by time, I loved walking the line.
Yes.
A beautiful kind of breadth of sculpture, and you could interact with everything from, you know, Rana Begum's colourful hanging works, but also Thomas Price's, you know, standing bronzes. So it was perhaps less a favourite sculpture and more a favourite walk, because I got such a diversity. And we were talking again, you know, about temporary sculpture, and often you can, if you visit sculpture parks, you see different things there. They're not always there permanently.
Yes.
I think probably in a more temporary favorite nature, and something that I think public sculpture also has the ability to do, is engage with prevailing issues. And I absolutely loved Olafur Ellison's Ice Watch, that was in the city of London, but I think, you know, he did it in Copenhagen. And you had those huge ice sheets melting in the street. So they were changing right in front of you, but they were confronting you with a very significant climate issue, of Greenland's ice sheets melting. So yeah, it's a really hard question, but different times and different, you know, permanence and temporary, all comes into the mix, I suppose.
Yes, I think that's lovely. It always, as you were talking about it, it reminded me of visiting Roche Court, and which is a fantastic sculpture park. If anyone hasn't been, I thoroughly recommend, near Salisbury. And it was incredibly misty, and there was the most enormous Barry Flanagan acrobats that you couldn't see as you entered the field because it was so misty, and then it just loomed out of the mist, which just, you know, made the hairs stand up on the back of your neck. But Nick, I was going to say, exactly as sort of chiming in with what Melissa was saying about your regular routes. I'm regularly on the A3, and I'm always so happy to see your piece. I've heard it called Angel of the South, which we've got on the screen here. And I was reading there's been press about it disappearing. Please tell us it's coming back.
Yeah, well, don't tell anyone, but we got a little bit of a plan here, to probably increase the piece in scale, and alter it significantly, but to try to capitalize on, here we are, what is actually a very small hill in a very open field on a very major highway artery. You know, it's the road from London to the coast. It drives directly through, as was my Henrietta, my wife's clever sort of thinking behind the reason why it's appropriate, as it straddles what we know, or some don't, as the oat belt of southern England, which at the 19th century provided the oats that fed the horses that built London. So there's quite a bit unknown. There is a point to it. There is an aspect of this which is to sort of wake up those weary commuters heading home from their day's toil in the city. As it is, as you may or may not, well, you know, it's a dull, it's a fast road that really doesn't relieve your senses. So there was this principle and concept of trying to just produce something here that would give something to an empty space. Yes, it's farmed, but it's been farmed for 100 years. It's Crown Estate land, and we had to work out how we could rent 2 meters square and work through the process with obviously community planners and public. But the public, you're right, have kind of mourned its loss since it was removed. But to answer the question, the plan is to, at the moment, to upgrade, should I say, or build it up to 36-foot high, which would be twice the height. The reason for this being that it would sit comfortably. At the moment, the existing piece was too small. It stood at 22 feet, even though it's been substituted temporarily by a 12-foot small horse standing there to sort of keep people's attention, with a view that within 6 months we should be able to site, all being well, again subject to question from public, etc., as to whether they approve. But we're going to give it a shot, and the plan is to scale up to just short. Well, it will be up to 40 feet in height, so it will be phenomenal. It will again be fashioned in copper sheet, which is affordable. I can oversee this myself in my studio. You know, it's economical. I use 3 assistants who work with me, who will be working on the project, and it's a collaboration. But it's to do with meeting where the public kind of cried when we moved it out. So this for me is a very good example. It's a sort of site. Why not?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a wonderful relationship. I remember de-installing an exhibition from the fantastic Peace Hall up in Halifax, and everyone came out and gave the exhibition a round of applause as it pulled off on its low loaders, and it's a magical thing. So which leads us nicely to our final question before we will open up to some questions from our audience, which is what happens next? Is the future bright for public sculpture? And as we know, it's changing fortunes. Claire, what do we think for where sculpture is going?
Well, I think, and I hope that the future's bright. I think that there is an appetite for public sculpture, and I think actually probably lockdown, and I'm thinking of Melissa walking along the line, was a really pivotal moment actually, because it was at a point where we were outside in our city or in our landscapes, and we didn't have any of the interruptions. Yeah. So it was literally us, the architecture and the sculpture. And I think a lot of people found sculptures that they loved, and they had the time and the peace and the quiet to actually start looking at them. So I think there's a sort of quiet revolution going on, and a quiet sort of appreciation of sculpture in its many different forms. And I think from my experience in the Northwest, where, you know, which is a very different sort of public, people from all sorts of different backgrounds, there is a genuine love and appreciation of things that are actually physically made. And Nick's work's a good example, because I think it is awe-inspiring. How do people make things that big? How do they do it? It's a magical, mystical process. And it's this extraordinary thing that I think will continue to inspire people.
Yes, absolutely. No. You know, interesting to see you know, just flicking through our images that we have here to see, you know, parity between, you know, sculpture by men and by women, and just more diversity in sculpture. Where do you think, you know, is the future bright for public sculpture?
Exactly. I think as Claire said, we have got a real turning point. I think as we've said today, you know, there's not only a real breadth of practice, breadth of opportunity from temporary, permanent, pop-up, different sites for interaction. I think, you know, something that again the pandemic brought, and what we've seen since, is this collective memory, collaborations in sculpture. It's such an expansive, powerful medium with such a breadth of definition today, and such different types of audiences. Again, I think you know, the future is very bright, and I think we'll see a widening and diversifying of sculptural practice and sculptors.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's unlike any other sculpture, you know, any other art form. Sculpture is commissioned, the artist creates it, and then it goes on and has a life of its own. And it always makes me think, my favourite story, Nick, about your marble arch piece with the footballs. Could you tell my favourite story?
Yeah, that's great. Well, no, all I know is that there was when they switched the horses' heads in, I think, 2010, they brought down the existing initial commission, and before it went off to the client. And these three footballs, I think there were three or four, rolled out. It was obviously a hollow shape, and which meant that, you know, there must have been some children, or probably grown children, should we say, with a football standing beneath it, trying to work out whether they could actually get it into the hole, having worked out there was a hole at the top of the head, which was about 27 foot. It's quite not an easy thing to achieve, because if you get it wrong, it's going to end up on the double-decker bus that's rotating at high speed round the roundabout. But it was the fact that once the ball was in, it wasn't coming out. And of course, nobody knew about these balls until the day the horse was due to be removed, and out they rolled. And I think there's something about, I think there's a sort of, that really is great encounter, isn't it? There's something we're all amused by thinking about this transitory moment. We don't know who they were. They were playing a game, but what they probably hadn't worked out, or I would have thought if it was me, is once the ball goes in, the game's over.
Yeah, maybe alcohol was involved.
I don't know, but I think that's where, you know, for me, that's all part of it, isn't it? Exactly. It's all part of this beautiful allowing for people to come and play. And one of the things I loved about it when I was up there was that when it was really hot in the sun, you used to see people sitting in the V of the shadow that was obviously moving slowly round, and they would move their picnics and their parties according to this shadow. So even though for a while I used to think what I do has absolutely no function, or not purpose, but no function, I realized actually it was, maybe to some, it was quite useful.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm looking for questions. I'm not sure if it was announced, but if anyone would like to put in the webinar chat, any questions that you would like to ask our panel, and maybe who you would like to ask, I would be very happy to pass them on for you. And just while we sort of see that, I was thinking earlier on today, the sculptures that never were. It's so interesting that there's sculptures that have been commissioned which never happened. The Mark Wallinger White Horse by the Eurostar. You know, because exactly as you said very early in our talk, these things cost money, you know, and it was so lovely to see with pieces like the Angel of the North that was mainly an art fund project, a lottery, I believe. So So it's lovely to see that there can be budgets for these things. Is it just me? I can't see any questions. Is it me being a technophobe?
No, I think we've answered them all.
Oh, clever us. Look at that. And we're bang on time.
Can I ask you a question, Abby? I think Claire and I were feeling this. What's your favourite sculpture?
Oh,
don't ask.
I think it's true. It like you were saying, it rang so true, Melissa, when you were saying that that it changes with the seasons. I mean, there was a James Turrell I saw recently in America, and it did actually move me to tears. But I couldn't tell you why. That's the glory of sculpture. That you were literally looking at a patch of light, but something just keyed in. Like a cave painting. It just made you feel, and just took you from just one thought in your mind to something completely different. So but as you know, it's hard to narrow it down because I'm a complete sculpture addict. So I want all of them. Yes, please.
And as we were saying earlier, actually, you can like sculptures for many different reasons.
Yes.
They're impressive, and some of them can be aesthetically not really your cup of tea, but because they are, for example, of an important woman by an important woman sculpture in an important site in Parliament Square, there is a reason to like that.
Yes.
And there are also, there are things. Yeah, it's a hideously difficult question, really, because it could change in a minute, really, couldn't it?
Mm-hmm. Well, if I can butt in, because I was hoping you weren't going to ask me, because I was really trying hard to work out which one it was, and strangely, I've come back thinking about it, trying to work it out, not having a huge breadth of experience with the huge amount of work that there is, of course. I came back to one of the first, if not the only, public sculpture I can ever remember seeing when I was at art school, so I must have been 20 years old, of course, was the Burghers of Calais. And the reason behind it was yet again, it was something what you said about it made me feel. That's what you said. Now, I didn't know really what I was looking at, except what I was seeing was an example of a man, or a sculptor, shall we say, who had given his life's work to a process and a journey. And I think, without knowing it, almost now, I can see why I would choose that for my encounter with it, but not on an aesthetic level necessarily, because Rodin was just too far out of he was just too damn good, and yet he was somebody who stands like many before and many still standing. And this is why I think it's really important that the pieces, I mean, rather like the piece, the Blumen, is it Blumenfeld, that piece we were talking about, the marble.
Mm.
It's a beautiful work of art. It's very simple, but it's when things sing and sit comfortably in the public place, we all have the chance to be moved, even if it's not our subject. And that, to me, is universal.
Yeah.
That's what happened to me. It happened to me.
Universal. And I think you've absolutely nailed it. It's the language of sculpture. Don't need to read the plaque. It speaks for itself. And the sculpture itself does the talking. And I think we've done all of our talking. Thank you so much. I can't tell you, you're my dream panel. I really appreciate you all giving up your time for this.
Pleasure.
It's been fantastic. Let's do it again sometime.
Yeah.
Definitely.